She once told me the stars meant nothing to her. Said they were just gas and fire and science. I remember that moment because I was staring at them when she said it. She ruined them for me. Not just the stars. Everything. It wasn't dramatic when I left. No shouting. No suitcase hurled down the stairs. Just a slow-motion betrayal that cracked something permanent in me, the kind of crack that doesn't heal, just grows quieter with time. We lived in a town so small you could hear your neighbor sneeze. A town where people smiled out of habit, and everyone knew which cars didn't belong. That's why I noticed when she started riding in someone else's. A dusty gray Ford Explorer that parked a block over every Thursday afternoon. Her name was Celeste. You'd expect a woman named that to be dreamy, ethereal. She was, once. Or maybe that was just me projecting. She loved wildflowers, hated bananas, and cried at commercials more than movies. I loved her without defense. The kind of love where you forget where you end and they begin. That kind. We were married 9 years. No kids, not for lack of trying. We told people we weren't in a rush, but the truth was we'd been through 3 rounds of IVF and 1 miscarriage. After that, we stopped talking about babies. We stopped talking much at all. I thought maybe grief was just eating her alive slowly, like it was me. I gave her space. I gave her silence. I gave her everything, really. And she gave herself to someone else. I didn't find out in a movie-worthy way. No lipstick on collars. No whispers from strangers. It was a receipt. A single, stupid receipt. I was pulling her cardigan from the laundry basket when it slipped out of the pocket. A hotel just outside town. 2 nights. 1 room. 1 queen bed. I stared at it for a long time, thinking it had to be a mistake. But I knew the handwriting on the sticky note attached. See you at 8 Red Heart. M. I had no idea who M was, but I never felt smaller than reading that heart. I didn't confront her. I did something worse. I pretended I didn't know. For a week, I lived like a ghost in my own house. I cooked for her, washed her clothes, listened to her lie about where she'd been. And every night, I sat up in the hallway after she fell asleep, just listening to the ticking of a clock I suddenly hated. I was too weak to fight, too tired to scream, too afraid of the answer to ask the question. Then one day, I left. I didn't pack much. I didn't leave a note. I walked out of the life I built with her like it was a burning building and I wasn't worth saving. I drove until the roads turned to gravel and the cell signal died. Found an abandoned fishing cabin 3 states away. Bought it from a man who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. Fit right in. I started over. Or tried. I chopped wood. I drank coffee from chipped mugs. I named the stray cat that kept showing up. I became the man no one remembered to look for. I was okay with that. But 3 years passed, and I never expected what came next. This morning, I opened the door to find her standing there. Celeste. Hair soaked. Eyes hollow. Holding something to her chest wrapped in a blue blanket. A little boy. She whispered like her voice was made of paper. He doesn't know you. But he's yours. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there with the door half open, staring at the woman who once wrecked me, holding a child wrapped in blue, claiming he was mine. My body froze, but my mind spiraled, grabbing at every possible explanation except the one she gave me. The boy couldn't have been older than 2. His head rested against her shoulder, his tiny fingers tangled in her coat. He was asleep, peaceful, as if he had no idea he had just been brought to the ruins of a man who had buried himself alive in the woods. Celeste's face looked different, older, yes, but not from time. It was grief, or exhaustion, or maybe shame. Her makeup was smeared under her eyes, her lips cracked from the cold. And still, I couldn't make myself step back or let her in. My heart was pounding, but not in the way I thought it would. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just lost. Like I was waking from a coma and didn't recognize the world around me. She whispered again. Please, let me come inside. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. But I stepped aside. The cabin was dim and small, just 1 room, a kitchenette, a fireplace, and the mattress on the floor. There were no photos. No clock. Just shadows and dust and a coat rack made of antlers. She looked around like she had stepped into a different planet. I watched her take it in, the life I built from nothing. The proof that I really had disappeared. She laid the baby, our baby, on the blanket I kept near the firewood. He stirred, yawned, and fell back asleep. That's when I noticed he had my ears. That ridiculous little curve that stuck out too far. The same one I'd always been insecure about. Celeste sat on the edge of a crate I used as a chair. She didn't touch me, didn't reach for my hand. For once in her life, she didn't try to control the moment. And then she said the one thing that shattered me all over again. I didn't come here to get you back. I blinked. My voice came out like gravel. Then why are you here? She looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped. She used to get them done every 2 weeks. Because you have a right to know. He's yours. I named him Caleb. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to process hearing that I apparently had a son, named, raised, and hidden from me for 2 entire years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her what kind of person lets the father of their child rot in the woods while she builds a new life. But I didn't. I sat down. I stared at the fire. And I said, start from the beginning. And she did. Her voice was calm, almost mechanical. She told me how things got worse after I left, how she couldn't sleep, couldn't explain where I'd gone to anyone, how she lied to everyone and said I needed space, how she didn't even know she was pregnant until a month after I disappeared. She said she tried to find me, that she hired someone, that no one could trace where I went. And by the time she gave birth, part of her believed I didn't want to be found. But you didn't try hard enough, I whispered. You let me stay gone. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. And maybe that was the worst part. There was no story to excuse what she did. No secret reason. Just fear. Cowardice. Silence. She said Jude left after she told him she was pregnant. He wasn't interested in raising someone else's child. That part hit me like a knife. So not only did she cheat, she gave herself to a man who discarded her like trash the moment things got real. He never loved me, she said quietly. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. And I saw it. The part of her that had finally crumbled. The part that used to believe she could control everything. It was gone. I've lost everything, she said. And I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know. Caleb is yours. And I can't do this alone anymore. The fire crackled. The boy sighed in his sleep. And I sat there, frozen between fury and confusion and a tiny, burning spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for her. Not for us. But maybe for him. I barely slept that night. I lay on the floor, facing away from them, watching the flickering fire slowly die out, my thoughts louder than the silence in the room. Celeste curled up near the wall, using her coat as a pillow. Caleb was between us, his small chest rising and falling so peacefully, as if he hadn't just been dragged across 3 states to meet a man he didn't even know existed. At some point in the night, he woke up crying. A soft, confused whimper that quickly turned into a desperate sob. I froze at first. I expected her to get up, to handle it like second nature. But she didn't move. She was either too tired or pretending not to hear it. So I sat up, unsure of what to do, unsure of what I was even allowed to do. And then I reached for him. He was warm and impossibly small in my arms. I held him awkwardly, my hands stiff, but he didn't pull away. He just clung to my shirt and cried into my neck. I hadn't held a child in years. I hadn't thought I ever would. And yet something in that moment broke me in a way I hadn't expected, quietly, like a branch snapping under soft snow. I sat with him like that for almost an hour, humming whatever tune came to mind, swaying gently near the fire. When he finally fell asleep against me, I looked up and saw her watching. Celeste didn't say a word, just stared at us with this expression that I couldn't read, part grief, part regret, part something else I didn't want to name. I didn't acknowledge her. I laid Caleb back down carefully, wrapped him tighter in the blanket, and then walked outside. The night air was brutal, sharp and unforgiving. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, watching the moon hover low behind the trees. My breath came out in clouds. Somewhere in the distance, I heard an owl, but mostly it was just me and the cold and the thoughts I couldn't shut off. I didn't want this. Not like this. I didn't want to be a father born out of betrayal. I didn't want to be faced with decisions I hadn't prepared for, with a child I hadn't even known existed until 24 hours ago. And I definitely didn't want her back in my life. But the thing that haunted me wasn't anger. It was guilt. Guilt that I had disappeared, that I hadn't stayed to fight, that I'd made it so easy for her to erase me. And maybe, in some twisted way, I'd let it all happen because I never really believed I was enough for her in the first place. The next morning, I made coffee. I didn't ask if she wanted any. I just handed her a mug and sat down across from her on the floor. The tension between us was thick but unspoken, like 2 strangers with too much history and no road map forward. I'm not going back with you, I said, staring at my hands. I didn't expect you to, she replied, her voice almost too soft. I don't even know him. I don't know how to be around him. You don't have to know everything now. He just needs to see you. That's all. I looked up. What happens after this? You drive away, and I'm left here with a toddler I don't know? That's your plan. She swallowed hard. No, that's not what I want. But I can't keep living the way I've been either. There it was again, vagueness wrapped in regret. But this time I didn't let her drift through it. You came all this way. You showed up at the door of a man who vanished for 3 years. You brought a child and a story and a pile of broken pieces. So what do you want, Celeste? Really? Her lips trembled. She looked at Caleb, then back at me. I want to give him what I didn't give you. A chance. I felt something catch in my chest. I hated how much those words landed. How they dug through all the layers of bitterness and found something human underneath. You think showing up here fixes any of it? No, she whispered. But not showing up would have destroyed whatever was left. I stood up, walked across the room, looked out the window even though there was nothing to see but frost and trees. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. Then stay. For now. Just stay. And she did. Not with promises. Not with expectations. Just a suitcase in the corner. A blanket on the floor. And a boy between us who didn't know he was changing everything. The first few days were strange in a way I can't fully explain. We didn't talk much, only what was necessary. Meals. Diapers. The occasional question about where I kept something. We were two people floating in the same space, connected only by the child who had dropped into my life like a stone into still water. Caleb adjusted quickly. Too quickly, maybe. As if he sensed that I was someone important before I even believed it myself. He followed me around the cabin, copying the way I walked, mimicking the sounds I made when I worked. I caught him once trying to lift a piece of firewood, his little arms wobbling under the weight. I didn't stop him. I let him try. When he gave up and sat down in defeat, I picked him up and carried him to the woodpile like it was the most natural thing in the world. Celeste watched these moments from a distance, always quiet, never interfering. She seemed smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but spiritually. Like the years had eroded something in her that even she hadn't noticed. One morning, after Caleb fell asleep in the middle of playing with a spoon and a pile of gravel, I sat across from her with a cup of coffee in hand. The words came slowly, like they were covered in dust. How long were you going to wait before telling me? Her eyes stayed on the fire. I don't know. That's not an answer. I was afraid, she said simply. Afraid you'd slam the door in my face. Afraid you'd tell me I didn't deserve to be his mother. I didn't respond right away. I just stared into my cup, watching the steam twist and rise like it wanted to disappear too. You didn't deserve to keep him from me, I finally said. You didn't have that right. She nodded. No excuses. No defense. Just the truth landing between us like a cold wind. I didn't know how to face you, she whispered. I thought about it so many times. I even wrote letters I never sent. But every time I pictured your face, I couldn't breathe. I looked at her then. Really looked. And I saw something new, not just guilt, but devastation. Not just regret, but loneliness. I didn't even get to see him be born, I said. Do you know what that does to a man? Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her mug. I didn't know how to give you that moment without destroying what little you had left. You destroyed it anyway. She nodded again. Her silence said more than any apology could. That night, after Caleb fell asleep, she sat by the fire with her knees drawn to her chest, staring into the flames like they held some kind of answer. I sat across from her, not saying a word, not needing to. For the first time since she arrived, I wasn't waiting for her to explain herself or fix the past. I had finally accepted what was already broken. Then she said something I never expected. I think he's starting to forget the man I was with. I glanced up. The yoga guy? She almost smiled. His name was Marcus. But yeah, him. He was never meant to be anything permanent. Did he know about the baby? He guessed. Said he hoped it wasn't his and vanished before I could prove it either way. I shook my head. Sounds like a real class act. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't love him. I don't even think I liked him. He was just there when everything else fell apart. And I wasn't. She looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. You left. I had to. I know. We sat there, two people drowning in memory, and for once, not trying to pull the other under. That night, I fell asleep next to the fire with Caleb in my arms, his breath warm against my neck. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream about disappearing. I dreamed about staying. The snow came early that year. Thick, heavy flakes that muted the world outside the cabin and made everything feel suspended, like time had slowed down just for us. The roads disappeared under layers of white, and with no internet, no phone signal, and no one around for miles. The three of us were completely alone. Strangely, it didn't feel claustrophobic. It felt like the first honest moment I'd lived in years. Mornings became a routine. I'd get up before sunrise, light the fire, boil water, and watch the snow pile against the windows. Caleb would wake up just after dawn, always with a burst of joy, laughing at shadows or chasing light on the floor. It was like he didn't know the world had been broken before he came into it. He just existed, pure and unbothered. I envied that. Celeste slept in longer than both of us. She looked exhausted all the time, dark circles under her eyes, her skin paler than usual. I didn't ask questions. I still wasn't sure what we were to each other, or what kind of space we were creating. But I cooked extra portions anyway. I made sure she had tea instead of coffee when I noticed it upset her stomach. I left the warmer blankets on her side at night. None of this meant forgiveness. It just meant that I hadn't forgotten who I was, and no amount of betrayal could kill that part of me. One afternoon, while Caleb napped and Celeste helped me split logs out back, she paused and stared out at the tree line. Her breath came out in fog. "You ever think about how fast everything can fall apart?" she asked, not looking at me. "All the time," I said. "Especially lately. I used to think love was something you earned by being exciting, by always changing, always moving. But you were still. You were reliable. I thought that made you less." I kept my eyes on the axe in my hands. "So you went looking for fireworks, and all you found was smoke." She let out a laugh, sad and brittle. "Something like that." We didn't speak again for a while. Just the sound of wood cracking under steel and the occasional chirp from inside where Caleb was beginning to wake up. That night, it stormed. The wind howled through the trees like it was trying to rip the cabin from the earth. Power cut out, though we barely used it anyway. We lit candles and curled up close near the fire. Caleb clung to me while thunder rattled the walls. Celeste sat across from us, staring again, and for a long time, I avoided her eyes. When Caleb finally dozed off, I carried him to the corner mattress and laid him down. I turned back toward the fire, and she was standing closer now. Not too close. Just closer. "I never expected you to still be this gentle," she said softly. "After what I did, you shouldn't have come expecting anything." "I didn't. I just couldn't carry it alone anymore. He deserves more than a mom full of regrets." I stepped past her and added another log to the flames. "You could have told me years ago. You chose not to." She nodded. "I was selfish." "Yes, you were. And scared. That too." She hesitated, then said something I hadn't let myself consider. "I think I'm sick." I turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She looked down, hands trembling. "I don't have a diagnosis yet, but I've been having these episodes. Fainting. Memory slips. Fatigue that won't go away. That's part of why I came. If something happens to me, I wanted him to know you, even if you hate me." The fire popped loudly, like it was reacting to her words. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My brain was spinning too fast. Just as I was beginning to rebuild some version of myself in this isolation, she'd shown up with a child I never knew existed, a trail of buried history, and now the possibility that she might be dying. It was too much. All of it. I got up and walked out into the snow barefoot, ignoring her calling my name. I didn't stop until my skin burned and my breath hurt in my chest. I stood out there under the black sky, letting the cold punish me, ground me, remind me that I was still alive, still capable of feeling something through the numbness. And when I finally came back inside, she was sitting by the fire again, clutching one of Caleb's stuffed animals to her chest. She didn't look up, and I didn't say a word. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not healing. Just the quiet truth that no matter how hard I tried to erase the past, it was sitting right there in front of me, sleeping in the next room. And I couldn't run anymore. I started watching her more closely after that night, not in anger or suspicion, but with a quiet sense of dread I didn't want to name. She was pale almost every morning. She moved slower than before. Her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. Once, when she bent to pick up Caleb's toy, she staggered and caught herself on the table. She brushed it off with a half smile, said it was just low blood sugar, but I knew it was more than that. The kind of thing people pretend doesn't matter until it's too late. I didn't push her. Maybe part of me still felt like I didn't have the right. After all, she was the one who'd showed up on my doorstep, not the other way around. But every hour spent in that cramped cabin, with the snow cutting us off from the outside world, was making the questions in my head louder. I started doing more for Caleb. Dressing him, feeding him, reading him books before bed. His eyes lit up every time I came near him now, And that did something to me I hadn't prepared for. The moment he said "da-da," without hesitation, without confusion or doubt, I nearly broke down on the spot. He looked so sure, so proud, like he had always known I was his. That same night, Celeste was curled up in one of the chairs, staring into the flames like she'd been doing every night since she arrived. I sat across from her, holding Caleb in my lap as he drifted off to sleep. "You need to see a doctor," I said. Calmly, firmly. She didn't answer right away. Just kept watching the fire like she was trying to see something on the other side of it. "I know," she finally said. "Then go. Take the car. I'll stay with him. I can't leave you both. Not like this." "You already did," I snapped before I could stop myself. She flinched, but I didn't take it back. "You left me to grieve a life I didn't know I lost. You buried me in silence. Now you're back, and you're sick, and you think it's noble to tough it out here instead of getting help." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't come here to die, Everett." "Then stop acting like you did." The fire popped loudly, throwing sparks onto the stone floor. Caleb stirred in my arms, and I rocked him gently back to sleep. "I'll go," she whispered. "I'll leave tomorrow. There's a clinic in town. I'll find someone to take a look." "You're not going alone," I said. "I'm driving you." Her eyes widened. "You don't have to. I'm not doing it for you," I said, standing up. "I'm doing it for him. Because if something happens to you, I need to be ready." We didn't speak the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed the car in silence while she dressed slowly, wincing as she moved. Caleb was bundled in a thick blue coat, chattering to himself in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the gravity hanging between us. The clinic was quiet when we arrived. Small, tired. The nurse at the front desk didn't ask questions when we checked in as husband and wife. I let it slide. There wasn't time for details. She was in there for nearly 2 hours. I walked Caleb around the parking lot the entire time, stomping down snowbanks, making tiny trails with sticks, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. My palms were sweating despite the cold, and every time the door opened, I looked up like I was expecting bad news to walk out and punch me in the chest. When she finally came out, her face told me everything. She was pale, shaking, trying to keep it together, but the walls were closing in. "Well?" I asked quietly. "They found something," she said. "A lesion on my brain. They think it's benign, but it's growing." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "More tests. An MRI. Maybe surgery. They don't know yet." I stood there for a second, trying to absorb it. Then I opened the car door and helped her inside. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Caleb babbled from the back seat, kicking his little boots against the cushion. The drive back was silent. The forest around us, blanketed in snow, felt colder than ever. That night, as she lay on the mattress, curled up and shivering despite 3 layers of blankets, I sat nearby and watched her sleep. And I hated myself for still feeling something, for still wanting her to get better, for still seeing the woman I once loved buried under all the ruins. But most of all, I hated that this was happening now, after everything. After lies, silence, and betrayal, I was the one holding her hand when the world started falling apart again. And for the first time since she arrived, I realized I wasn't ready to lose her. Not like this. The next week passed in slow motion. Everything revolved around waiting. Waiting for her next appointment. Waiting for her symptoms to come and go. Waiting for the snow to clear enough so we could drive into town without sliding off the road. The silence between us shifted. It wasn't the old silence, the one soaked in resentment and broken trust. It was something heavier now, something that felt more like fear. She tried to hide the worst of it. Tried to pretend like her head wasn't pounding every morning, like she wasn't nauseous every time she stood too fast, like she didn't need help getting down the 3 steps to the porch. But I noticed. I noticed everything. And I hated that I still cared this much. One morning, while Caleb was stacking firewood chunks like blocks in the corner, I found her in the bathroom holding onto the sink for dear life, her knuckles white, her lips pale, eyes squeezed shut. I moved to help her, but she shook her head, too proud to fall apart in front of me. "I've got it," she mumbled. "No, you don't," I said gently. "And you don't have to pretend anymore." She didn't respond. Her body trembled like she was seconds from collapsing. I put an arm around her waist and guided her to the edge of the bed. She sat down without resistance. That's when I realized how bad it had gotten, how much she was struggling just to stay upright. I sat across from her and waited until she opened her eyes. You can't do this alone, I said. And I know you didn't come here expecting help. But you've got it, whether you want it or not. She looked up slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. I thought you hated me. I did, I answered. Some days I still do. But Caleb, he doesn't know any of that. All he knows is you're his world. And whether I like it or not, you're still part of mine. She closed her eyes again, and for the first time since she showed up, she let herself cry. Not a controlled sob. Not a single tear she wiped away before anyone could see. She broke down, shoulders shaking, lips trembling, tears soaking the front of her shirt. And I sat there, frozen, trying to remember when the last time was that I'd seen her this vulnerable. I didn't reach for her. I didn't pull her into my arms or whisper that it was going to be okay, because I didn't know if it would be. But I stayed. I stayed long after her crying stopped. I stayed even when she curled into a ball and fell asleep without another word. Later that day, I called the clinic from the only payphone in town. No cell reception. No digital footprint. I hadn't used my real name in 3 years, but that day, I gave them everything. Her full name. My name. Our location. I told them she couldn't wait months for a follow-up. That she needed help now. They scheduled her for a full scan in 3 days at the hospital 3 towns over. I said we'd be there. When I got back to the cabin, Celeste was in the rocking chair with Caleb asleep on her chest. She looked up at me, and I didn't need to say anything. She saw it in my face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me. Just stay alive." That night, we sat in front of the fire together, closer than we'd allowed ourselves to be in weeks. She talked about her childhood, things I'd never heard before. How her mother had left when she was 6. How she grew up learning to detach first so she wouldn't get left again. How even with me, someone steady and safe, she couldn't stop looking for chaos. It made her feel alive, she said. Until it didn't. She asked me why I left so completely. Why I didn't at least leave a note. I didn't give her an answer right away. Then I said the only thing that felt true. Because I was tired of being invisible in a house I helped build. She didn't argue. She just reached over and placed her hand on mine, softly, hesitantly, like she knew what that meant and didn't want to break it. We stayed like that for a while. Just the crackle of the fire. The weight of everything we'd never said finally settling in. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man who'd been abandoned. I felt like someone who had barely survived something he didn't have the words to describe, and maybe, just maybe, someone who was beginning to live again. But deep down, I still didn't trust the peace. I knew it was borrowed time, and time always comes back for what it's owed. We left before dawn, the truck tires crunching over frozen gravel as the world around us stayed hushed and gray. Caleb slept in the back seat, bundled in 2 blankets, his tiny face barely visible. Celeste leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Neither of us said much on the drive. There was nothing left to explain, nothing more to confess. Everything had already been broken wide open. Now it was about what came next. The hospital was bright and sterile, the kind of place where time stretches and people talk in hushed tones no matter how urgent things feel. While they ran her scans and tests, I walked Caleb up and down the long corridors, pointing to painted fish on the walls and showing him how the elevator buttons lit up. He didn't understand any of it. He just smiled and laughed and squeezed my finger like it was the only thing that made sense to him. Hours passed, then more. Eventually, the doctor came out and sat with me in the waiting room. His face was calm, not cold, not worried. Just focused. "The growth is operable," he said. "We caught it early. She's going to be okay." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled so hard I nearly got dizzy. I nodded slowly, gripping the arms of the chair. The weight on my chest that had pressed down for days, maybe years, lifted just enough to breathe again. She stayed in the hospital for observation that night. I brought Caleb in to see her after dinner. He sat on the edge of the bed, playing with her fingers, babbling nonsense like he was telling her everything he'd seen while she was gone. She smiled, really smiled, and brushed his hair back with shaking fingers. When visiting hours ended, I stood at the doorway holding Caleb and asked her quietly, "Do you want us to come back in the morning?" She looked at me, eyes soft, voice steady. "Yes, please." The next few weeks were filled with small moments that meant everything. She had the surgery. It went well. I stayed with her every day, sleeping on a chair, reading her old magazines, holding Caleb when she was too weak. We didn't talk about the past much anymore. We didn't need to. We just kept showing up, hour after hour, until something between us quietly shifted again. When we returned to the cabin, the snow had started to melt. You could see patches of earth again, the bare beginnings of spring. One afternoon, I found her outside with Caleb, kneeling beside a muddy patch of grass. She was helping him press seeds into the soil, wildflowers. The same kind she used to keep in jars on the windowsills back when life felt simpler. She looked up and saw me, dirt on her hands, sunlight catching in her hair. She smiled like she hadn't in years. Not apologetically, not cautiously, just openly. Thought we could try planting something, she said. Start fresh. I walked over, crouched beside them. I like that. Caleb grabbed my sleeve and pointed at the sky. A hawk was circling overhead, wide wings gliding effortlessly through the blue. His eyes lit up like it was the first bird he'd ever seen. I put my arm around them both, her on one side, him on the other. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like someone recovering from betrayal or loss. I felt like a man rebuilding something worth holding on to. Not because we erased the past, but because we'd finally stopped running from it.